Look around you. For half a century, the Arctic was a desolate frontier, a frozen buffer between superpowers defined by remote weather stations, submarine patrols, and the constant chilling threat of nuclear deterrence. It was too cold, too dangerous, and too irrelevant to global commerce to matter. That reality has vanished. The Arctic isn't just melting, it is being aggressively claimed, militarized, and monetized. We are now witnessing the birth of a new trillion-dollar sea lane, and with it, the start of a silent geopolitical conflict, the Ocean's Cold War. This isn't just about shipping, it's about oil, minerals, military dominance, and the fastest, most consequential path between East and West. Today, on the Maritime Index, we dissect the anatomy of this new Cold War and reveal why the melting ice is not just a climate crisis, but the ultimate prize in a global resource race. The global economy, as we demonstrated, runs on water, through narrow, easily choked passages like the Suez and Panama canals. These choke points are vulnerable to drought, piracy, and political instability. The Arctic, however, offers a tempting escape, a shortcut that defies history. The route from Shanghai to Rotterdam via the Suez Canal takes around 34 days. The Northern Sea Route, NSR, which runs along Russia's vast northern coast, can slash that transit time by up to 14 days, cutting the journey distance by 40%. For a shipping industry addicted to just-in-time delivery and obsessed with fuel consumption, a cost of over $650,000 per voyage on major routes, this time, advantage is nothing short of an economic revolution. It promises to redefine the entire map of global logistics. This promise is backed by staggering wealth. The U.S. Geological Survey estimates that the Arctic region holds an astonishing 13% of the world's undiscovered conventional oil resources, and 30% of its undiscovered conventional natural gas resources. That translates to roughly 90 billion barrels of oil and over 1,670 trillion cubic feet of natural gas, mostly situated offshore. Beyond hydrocarbons, the seabed contains vast quantities of rare earth minerals, essential components for electric vehicle batteries, advanced defense systems, and modern electronics. Minerals for which China currently holds a near monopoly. The melting ice is not just revealing water, it's revealing the most significant cache of untapped strategic resources on the planet. This treasure makes the Arctic not just a transit zone, but the ultimate high-stakes prize for resource extraction in the 21st century. The players are already moving their pieces, and the price of entry is rising rapidly. The Arctic is a unique battlefield because the conflict is fundamentally driven by two forces, geography and climatology. Geography presents the shortest path, and climatology, specifically the rapid retreat of summer sea ice, is making that path accessible. The volume of cargo carriage on the Northern Sea Route reached a historical record in 2023, exceeding 36.25 million tons, with expectations for continued growth well beyond 20% annually. This cargo is overwhelmingly Russian-controlled oil, iron ore concentrate, and liquefied natural gas, LNG, primarily from massive projects like Yamal LNG. This internal traffic proves the route is viable, but the real prize remains international transit, the movement of containerized goods between Asia and Europe. Economically, the calculation is brutal. Studies show that the NSR route can be twice as energy efficient as the one via the Suez Canal for certain voyages. However, these savings are currently offset by massive operational costs, the high insurance premiums, the necessary escorts by nuclear-powered icebreakers, and the lack of reliable port infrastructure. For the NSR to truly replace Suez, it needs full year-round navigability and Western-controlled infrastructure, neither of which currently exist. This brings us to the core issue, the legal status of the route. Russia is the dominant force in the region, controlling the entire 5,600-kilometer length of the Northern Sea Route. Moscow asserts that the NSR constitutes internal Russian waters, giving them the sovereign authority to demand fees, regulate traffic, and mandate Russian icebreaker escorts. This unilateral claim is the cornerstone of their Arctic doctrine and a massive geopolitical advantage. By declaring the NSR as internal waters, Russia can effectively manage access, prioritize its own energy exports, and potentially veto the transit of rival nations, treating the world's shortest shipping lane as a toll road guarded by military assets. To enforce this doctrine, Russia has undertaken the most comprehensive and rapid militarization of the High North since the Cold War. They have reopened and modernized over 50 previously closed Soviet-era military posts, including the refurbishment of 13 air bases, 10 radar stations, and 20 border outposts along the route. Their premier naval force, the Northern Fleet, maintains a formidable presence, equipped for both nuclear deterrence and conventional naval warfare in the polar region. Crucially, they possess the world's largest and most advanced fleet of nuclear-powered icebreakers, currently numbering 8 operational vessels, with plans to expand that to 15 to 17 in the coming years, including the immense project Tun-5-10 Rossiya-class icebreakers. This fleet is the functional key to the NSR. Without Russian icebreaker assistance, the route remains largely impassable for conventional vessels. This icebreaker diplomacy allows Russia to exert soft and hard power, solidifying their status as the indispensable gatekeeper. China, the great non-Arctic power, views this situation through the lens of trade dependency. As the world's largest trading nation, China's economic engine is highly vulnerable to choke points like the Suez and the Strait of Malacca. Beijing has therefore pursued a deliberate long-term strategy, explicitly positioning itself as a near-Arctic state. This is formalized in its ambitious Polar Silk Road, PSR, launched in 2018 as a strategic extension of its Belt and Road Initiative, BRI. The PSR aims to integrate the NSR into its global network, ensuring alternative trade routes and securing access to Arctic resources. China's strategy is financial infiltration and infrastructure investment. They have engaged in significant energy projects, holding substantial stakes in Russia's massive Yamal LNG and Arctic LNG-2 projects. Chinese state enterprises have invested heavily in specialized ice-capable shipping and Arctic research facilities in Nordic nations. While the visibility of the PSR has fluctuado, the long-term ambition remains to secure a presence and influence that bypasses dependence on a potentially hostile West. The record 14 passages by COSCO-owned ships in 2021, before geopolitical tensions slowed, traffic demonstrated the very real potential of the Chinese-driven PSR. The West's response, led by the United States and the NATO alliance, is one of deep concern and re-engagement. NATO has acknowledged the strategic challenge posed by Russia's and China's capabilities in the High North. The alliance, now comprised of 7 Arctic nations, following the accession of Finland and Sweden, has intensified its military presence and exercises in the region. The U.S. Army reactivated the 11th Airborne Division in Alaska, focused entirely on Arctic warfare, and the Coast Guard received approval for the construction of the first U.S.-built polar icebreaker in 5 decades, albeit still trailing far behind the Russian fleet. The core legal battlefield is the question of sovereignty. The West, citing international law, insists the NSR must be treated as an international strait, guaranteeing full freedom of navigation. This conflict of legal definitions, internal Russian waters versus international waters, carries massive economic and military weight. If the world accepts Russia's internal waters claim, it validates their toll on global trade. If the West prevails, it opens the door to full international competition, and Western military presence in Russia is currently protected northern flank. This ongoing legal dispute is a strategic deadlock that underpins the entire military and economic tension in the Arctic. The excitement surrounding the economic promise of the Arctic often overshadows the inherent catastrophic risks of the region. The efficiency of the NSR comes at an enormous, unquantified cost to the most fragile ecosystem on the planet. Firstly, the pollution factor is severe. The vast majority of shipping traversing the NSR, and indeed much of the Arctic, relies on heavy fuel oil, HFO. HFO is cheap and effective, but it is one of the dirtiest fuels on Earth. It produces high levels of sulfur and nitrogen oxides, but more dangerously, it releases black carbon particulates. Black carbon accelerates ice melt, because when these dark soot particles settle on the bright white snow and ice, they dramatically reduce the reflectivity, albedo, of the surface, causing it to absorb more solar heat and melt faster. Black carbon emissions from Arctic shipping increased by 85% between 2015 and 2019. The shipping industry is therefore directly contributing to the very phenomenon, ice melt, that makes their new route possible. It is a profound, self-destructive paradox. Secondly, the risk of an oil spill in the Arctic is unparalleled. HFO, when spilled, emulsifies and breaks down slowly in the cold, dark Arctic waters. There is currently no effective, proven method for cleaning up a major oil spill in ice-choked waters. A spill resulting from a collision or grounding, a high-probability event given the variable ice conditions, poor visibility, and limited charting, would be an environmental catastrophe of unprecedented scale. The oil would trap under the ice, wiping out marine life and devastating the food sources for indigenous communities like the Inuit and the Sami, whose livelihoods and culture depend entirely on the fragile ecosystem. The environmental price tag of the NSR is potentially infinite. Beyond the environment, the region is defined by a massive infrastructure deficit. Unlike the Suez, which has established port facilities, rescue tugs, and communication systems, the Arctic is vast and desolate. Any vessel experiencing mechanical failure or collision is isolated, relying almost entirely on the Russian search and rescue (SAR) infrastructure. This reliance on a geopolitical rival for critical safety services is another subtle layer of Russian leverage. A Western-flagged ship in distress must put its fate into the hands of a government that views its presence with suspicion. This lack of Western-controlled infrastructure is a strategic weakness that complicates NATO's doctrine of freedom of navigation in the High North. The Arctic Council, comprised of the 8 Arctic states, including Russia, the US, Canada, and the Nordic nations, was long the primary forum for cooperation on environmental protection and SAR agreements. However, following the 2022 invasion of Ukraine, the Council's work has been severely hampered. The Western members have temporarily paused formal cooperation with Russia, isolating the one nation with the most physical control over the NSR. This breakdown of diplomatic channels means that, even as the risk of an accident increases due to rising traffic, the established mechanisms for coordination and risk management are effectively paralyzed. The legal, military, and environmental doctrines are now operating in silos, increasing the likelihood of miscalculation and crisis. Furthermore, the resources themselves are a source of conflict. The pursuit of rare earth minerals and hydrocarbons creates a moral and ethical dilemma for nations and corporations. Development in the Arctic is estimated to be 50 to 100% more costly than comparable projects in less remote areas. Yet the strategic value of these resources justifies the expenditure. The focus is currently on the Yamal Peninsula and the Barents Sea, where Russia is rapidly expanding its LNG capacity, using the NSR primarily as an export route. As the ice recedes further, The race for offshore drilling and deep-sea mining exploration will intensify, bringing multinational energy and mining giants into direct confrontation with indigenous rights and fragile habitats. The conflict is no longer theoretical. It is operational, driven by the drill bit and the bottom line. The story of the Arctic is the ultimate climate paradox. The same global warming that threatens the future of our planet is simultaneously unlocking what world powers view as the next great economic frontier. The ice is melting and the world is heating up, both figuratively and literally. The Ocean's Cold War is fought with a peculiar set of weapons. It is fought with the immense hull of a nuclear icebreaker, the legal authority of a territorial claim, and the subtle influence of a multi-billion-dollar infrastructure investment. It is a slow-motion conflict, but one whose resolution will determine the global balance of power for the next century. If Russia solidifies its claim over the NSR as internal waters, it gains unprecedented control over a major portion of global trade, allowing it to exert political and economic leverage against Asia and Europe. If NATO can successfully establish the route as an international strait, it guarantees freedom of navigation, but also escalates the potential for direct military confrontation in the most sensitive ecological zone on Earth. The cost of this new efficiency is borne by the environment and the global consumer. The price of every good shipped through the NSR must eventually reflect the cost of decarbonization and the massive investment required to make the route truly safe and reliable. The long-term trajectory is clear. The Maritime Index of the Arctic will become the world's most watched economic indicator, reflecting not just the price of oil or gas, but the complex, volatile balance between geopolitical ambition and ecological survival. The melting of the polar ice caps is not just an environmental data point, it is a geopolitical trigger. The great powers are not waiting for the ice to fully disappear. They are investing, building, and maneuvering now. China's Polar Silk Road and Russia's Northern Fleet expansion are concrete evidence of their commitment to a future defined by this route. The countermoves by NATO and the US are designed to ensure that the Arctic remains a space for international law, not unilateral control. The integrity of the Arctic Council must be restored to manage the shared risks of search and rescue, oil spill response, and environmental protection before a major disaster forces the world to confront the fragility of this new trade lane. The next time you hear a weather report about record ice melt, remember the implications for global trade. Remember the trillions of dollars of resources sitting beneath the seabed. Remember the ships already plying the waters, charting a course that could bypass Suez and redefine the relationship between East and West. The small, often ignored world of maritime trade is once again at the center of the largest global conflict. This index, the price of navigating the thinning ice, is perhaps the most important and least understood metric of our globalized world. Thank you for watching the Maritime Index.